This is Continuum Drag, a podcast where we watch sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Legend, episode 12.
I'd like to say something from the heart.
Well, if you insist.
Your books are getting better.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast riding off into the sunset. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
That brings an interesting question. The end of the show literally has someone riding off to the sunset, and then we have our two main characters waving, maybe not directly to the audience, but it feels a little bit like they're waving goodbye to the audience. We've seen this in a show before, right? I looked it up in my notes. I can't remember what show. They also ended with them waving.
We've seen two shows where the final episode has the main character waving to the audience.
What are those?
One was Swamp Thing.
That was the one I was thinking. I was looking through my notes. I'm like just searching for waving, and I couldn't find it. Oh, that's right.
The other was, of course, RoboCop.
Oh, RoboCop. I mean, it's a sign of a good show. You know?
All the top shows have the final episode have the main character turn to camera and wave to you.
It's the least original way. They're in the room, the writer's room. They're just like, I don't know. What if they just wave goodbye? They'll get it, right? And like, yeah, just do that.
Maybe the audience will miss us if we wave to them directly, and they'll be like, oh, now I feel bad that we canceled you.
Yeah, I don't think too many people felt too bad, except for Chris, maybe.
Well, let's get into it, because we took the escape pod last podcast, and now we're on the final episode of Legend. We're here for the grand finale. I don't know what the word was looking for there. In magnanimous. That's not a word. I don't know what I'm looking for. It's early morning. But this show got canceled, as I believe our guest last episode, Chris, had mentioned. And I looked a little bit at the UPN canceling, or at least what's written on Wikipedia about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Chris mentioned a lot of this, but essentially there was a change of management in the first year UPN was running. And there was low ratings across the board for a lot of their shows. So they just decided to cancel pretty much everything but Voyager. And Jordan, I looked up what those canceled shows were. Do you think you know any of the shows on UPN other than Legend and Voyager?
I don't think so, because I remember, I think we said this in the first podcast we did on this show. I remember some advertisements about this show, but that's about it. So, yeah, I don't know. Unless these were heavily advertised during Voyager, I don't think I'd know.
Well, here is the culling of year one of UPN. All the shows cut with Legend. Show called Deadly Games. Show called Live Shot. Marker. Nowhere Man. The Watcher. Pigsty. And Platypus Man.
Platypus Man, I know.
Really? Yeah,
Platypus Man. It was a comedy. It was a sitcom.
Yeah, I was like, what is this show? And it's about a man who runs a cooking show.
Yeah, and this is not funny at all, but I know that the main actor of that show ended up committing suicide, which was something that it just was, for whatever reason, those two bits of information have stuck in my mind for that. Not that that's funny at all. It's horrible, but I remember Platypus Man.
The things your mind retains are disturbing.
I know, isn't it terrible? I wish it was some nicer things.
But that was the culling. It's very funny. I think Nowhere Man is on our list of Nowhere Man and Deadly Games is on our master list of possible shows to watch for the podcast, because they are both in the science fiction realm.
You're saying we should do an entire year of canceled UPN shows?
I mean, it seems like there's an entire 3 years of canceled UPN shows here. You want to know what happens on Pigsty, don't you? A show where 6 men share an apartment and their female landlord has to put up with them.
It's so funny with some of these old sitcoms that when you hear the synopsis, you're just like, who would ever get these? And then you realize you're like, well, Three's Company was on TV for quite some time.
You never know. You never know what's going to strike the public's fancy. Anyway, since we took the escape pod, Jordan, we've skipped over 6 episodes of Legend. So I've got the titles of all of these episodes, and do you want to see if you can come up with what these episodes might have been about?
Of course, that'd be great.
The first one is called Knee High Noon.
Knee High Noon. It's an episode where Legend goes to save someone. It's damsel in distress or something. And what ends up happening is he gets stuck in some quicksand up to his knees, and every time he moves, he starts getting lower and lower. So he has to try to somehow contact Bartok, that's his name, right? To get over, to use a contraption to get him out of the quicksand.
I'm afraid it is about his publisher demands that he add Legend Jr. as a character, and they give him a kid sidekick.
Oh, you know what? How great would this show be if they did like the what were those kids, the Super Scamps? What were their names in that?
Super Scouts?
Yeah. In Scamps, I call them. They were always up to trouble. In that Galactica 1980. Imagine they did that at this show, or they just added a bunch of kids. It's so terrible.
I mean, not that we know these characters very well, but like Bartok Jr., Ramos Jr., Skeeter Jr.
Or even better, remember that episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where they like Picard and a bunch of other people become kids?
I do vaguely remember this episode.
It could be like that too. Anyways,
all right.
Doesn't matter. The show's canceled.
Your next episode, The Gospel According to Legend.
I think what it is Legend gets bonked on the head, and he starts hearing voices, and he thinks the person that rescues him when he's like found in the desert, he's being like knocked out, and because he's kind of out of it, they think that he's communicating directly with God, like Joan of Arc or something, and he's trying to get out, but he's like not in his best of conditions, and once again Bartok comes with some little tool to get him out of these hijinks.
When I read that title, I was thinking, given the show's penchant for like finding historical characters from the same time period for Bartok to interact with, I was like, oh, is he going to go to Salt Lake City and like meet some Mormons who have just settled the area? But that's not what happens. It is about Pratt recognizing a new preacher in town who used to be a snake oil salesman.
Ugh, you know what? That was an episode of A Little House on the Prairie with Johnny Cash. But anyways, moving on.
Next episode, Bone of Contention.
Bone of Contention is an interesting episode because it's similar to this one, where a skeleton is found, but the skeleton seems to be of the body of Pratt. And so everyone thinks not only is he Legend, but he's also dead. And then he has to simultaneously prove that he's not dead and that he's also Legend.
Okay, it's about a murder over a dinosaur bone.
You know what? That's a better episode than mine.
All right, Revenge of the Herd.
It's actually a pun title. And
it is a fun title, yes.
Pratt / Legend loses his hearing. And I don't know. He's got to use what Bartok's listening device to try to solve a crime or something.
It's about the European publisher of the Legend novels wants to go on a buffalo hunt.
I think mine's better, even though I put very little effort into that.
Fall of a Legend.
Again, pun because it takes place in autumn. But this is really about people somehow getting less stupid in this world, and they all realize that Legend and Pratt are two different people, and that he's a writer and not the actual character. And so it's him finally shaking loose this Legend moniker and getting to be himself again.
Bartok invents education for people, and they get smarter by going to school.
That's right. Yeah.
No, it is about Pratt is convicted of murder.
What's the title?
Fall of a Legend.
Yeah. Well, he's gonna get away. He's gonna be found.
It's wrongfully. I assume wrongfully convicted.
Yeah, he's wrongfully accused. Yeah.
And finally, the last episode we didn't watch, Clueless in San Francisco.
This one, he also I like Pratt getting head injuries, and he has a head injury, and he wakes up in San Francisco. But not only does he not know how he's there, but he also doesn't remember who he is. So it's sort of like Memento, but seen through the lens of 1994's Legend.
It is about the wife of a Blackfoot chief who wants Pratt's help finding her parents, whom she was, quote, accidentally separated from when she was young.
Ooh, that quote around accidentally is not too good.
Yeah, I noticed that it said accidentally in the synopsis. I was like, accidentally?
Yeah.
I'm sure that episode would have been just fine.
Yeah, and I have to say, before we even get into this is the last episode, episode 12. So they got through 12 scripts of this. I had been saying throughout these podcasts that this is kind of the show they want to make, and I still kind of feel that. But I did think that they had never any real intention to make a comment or to have any sort of deeper discussion about anything. It was sort of like, let's have a good time. Occasionally we're going to throw in a historical figure. It'll be a little wink and a nod and you'll like it. And we're not going to get too deep, and we're not going to worry too much about the obvious issues that come up at this time period, whether it be race or religion. But this episode sort of breaks that a little bit, but maybe not that successfully. I think they're trying. I think they're trying to do something here for the first time, at least the first time I've seen an episode.
I will also note in those 6 episodes we just discussed, you'll notice something very specific. There are no historic figures mentioned in any of the synopses for it. They seem to have steered, and like this episode again, no historic figures. It seems like halfway through they started steering away from that like cameo historical figure.
Which I haven't watched those episodes, but watching this, I think it's for the better. Would you agree with me?
I will give it this, and this is something we've discussed, and I did note in the comments on the YouTube video that it's the first time that it has ever happened, but this is an episode dedicated more to Ramos's character, and like the comment it did say, it's like, it's nice to see them focus on Ramos for a change. And I was just like, it is nice for them to have another character. They've got all these characters, and like it's an we'll get into it, but I do feel like it was an improvement. And
last thing I'll say before we get into it is, did you notice a Continuum Drag All-Star in this?
No, who was it?
So there's an actor named John Vernon who plays the older, kind of old racist Seamus Calhoun. Mm-hmm. He was a character, Jeffrey Darrow, in a very, very, very early podcast episode of ours, The Quester Tapes.
Oh, that is a very early one.
I actually recognized his face. I was like, what do I know this guy from? And then I was like, oh, Quester Tapes. Well, that's been a while.
My favorite show, Quester Tapes.
Well, for whatever reason, that one has also stayed in my head. That and what minor celebrities commit suicide.
All right, let's get into it. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 12, Skeletons in the Closet. The skeleton of a dead Aztec Indian leads Ramos on a journey to find out what happened to the stranger, and a personal journey of his own.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I think it's a good little synopsis for it, and it opens on Bartok's latest invention, the Bartok Parcelloscope, which is just a zeotrope, which for sure was already invented by now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the joke, but now we've gone through, I don't know how many actual episodes we've seen of the show, six maybe of the show, but we're on episode 12 here. Of all the episodes we've seen, we've mentioned we've barely learned anything about Bartok. The most we learned about him was probably in the first episode, and they kind of went, we don't know what to do with him. Do you think the idea is that he is supposed to be a bad inventor, like we're supposed to kind of be laughing at him, or do you think he's a misunderstood one, or it's that he's actually a genius? Because it feels like they were pushing for I'm an actual genius who got sidelined early in my career, and he's sort of like struggling to get back, but they've never really went back to that. What's your sense of him, even coming to this episode?
Yeah, I mean, his inventions are rarely bad. They really go wrong occasionally, but not that often. They're usually ahead of their time. I think you're supposed to think he is a genius who's inventing great stuff, and I guess they're early on in that first episode, there was the idea that like he was tossed out by Thomas Edison or something. But I do think you're supposed to be like, he is a great inventor who's creating like cutting edge material. He's Q from James Bond, not from Star Trek.
So the maybe more or larger issue is that the writers can't come up with more interesting things for him to invent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just fits whatever the episode. Like in this episode, he's invented this like zeotrope because the publisher wants him to turn Legends books into motion pictures, which is insane because also it's just like motion pictures of exactly 12 photos. So I'm not entirely sure how they're like we're shooting an entire script about it. I was like, so you switch the 12 photo reel every 1 second and see the next part of the adventure? It doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it wasn't clear because they seemed like it was sort of set up like they were filming an early movie, like a sort of like silent feature. And I was like, is that what they're doing? But it was like, no, they're not. So
they've set up Matrix style 12 cameras in a row that will take 12 photos, and then they'll put that in the zeotrope. But like the first one we see is like Pratt is supposed to be playing Legend, and he's going to run at a bad guy, and they're going to like have a bunch of explosions happen. In the final frame of it, he'll explode and be thrown into the air, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And did you catch they referenced back to the bank robbery episode?
No.
they're like, I believe Pratt says, like, I hope you learned more about explosives since that time you blew the safe out of that bank in episode 2. And I was like, oh, yeah, I watched that.
I didn't catch it.
But, of course, it goes wrong because it's with all of Bartok's things. The explosion's too big. He flips him in the air. He lands dazed on the ground and has a hallucination where an uncredited Laura Flynn Boyle appears to him as like, they name her Teresa Dunleavy, which I couldn't find any historical. That's not like I couldn't find anything to be like that's a historical figure, and she never appeared on the show before, so it's not like she was in an episode we didn't see. So I don't know who this character's supposed to be. And the character,
was it? I thought maybe it was a character from one of his books.
Oh, maybe, but the character's also beckoning him to die so they can be together, and Pratt's just like, yes, I would love to die.
It was weird. It was weird because we had, while we're watching this, we were also watching this series, I should say, we were also watching a very different series in City in the City. And there was a similar type of scene, but at the very end of the show that was earned. You know, it gets to a certain point where these two characters, you were like, oh, I understand why we're having this scene. This didn't make any sense. You're like, oh, is that what he wants? Is he tired of life?
Well, it's all for the gag because he's having this hallucination. As he comes out of the hallucination, he's leaning forward to kiss her, and when he comes out, it's Skeeter standing over top of him, and he tries to kiss Skeeter. Like, it's all for the gag that he tries to kiss a man. That's it. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, but then also, what I liked about this was the whole thing could have been a setup for what we're gonna see, which is he's gonna also see there's a skeleton. He's laying on top of a skeleton, which is like, oh no, why is this skeleton here? Who is this? This could be the mystery of the show. But yeah, instead of going like he wakes up and if they even want to do that gag, instead of kissing this woman, he's kissing a skeleton. But they're like, no, it's gonna be funny. He's kissing the guy. You're like, to what effect? They're like, it's just funny. Anyways, he's on a skeleton.
Yeah, he's woken up in a skeleton, and Ramos recognizes the ring on the skeleton's finger as belonging to an Aztec tribe, and he's like, we should get this returned to the tribe. It's an important symbol for them, and probably we need to like repatriate the bones, etc., etc. And they're like, great idea, Ramos. Why don't you take the skeleton to the nearby town's local sheriff and task him with that? And of course, as this is what you were alluding to earlier, when he gets there, the sheriff is just a huge racist.
Yeah, and this is going to be the underlying theme of the episode is not only racism and the differences in how these races and cultures are treated, but also the discovery of oneself and one's heritage and one's lineage is what they're sort of playing with. I think they aren't deft enough to really make a proper comment, and maybe they shouldn't. I don't know, but it's like there's something in this episode, and I like that it's a Ramos episode. Ramos, I don't know properly pronounce his name. But yeah, I was like, good effort, but I don't know if you guys really hit this one out of the park.
I mean, that's just it. Is when he's handing over the bones, obviously he's mistreated by this sheriff who doesn't really take him very seriously. But the sheriff's also just like, well, if you're Aztec, why don't you know where to bring the skeleton? Like, don't you recognize the ring? And it's an interesting twist. I didn't see this coming initially, and you know, obviously, as you said, this is maybe not the most deft writing on earth, but like for a character arc, they're just like what Ramos is realizing is, you know, he's well educated, he's been to Harvard, he's quite a smart man, but he has very little connection to his heritage, and it sort of sets him out on a journey to like reconnect with like his heritage, which is an interesting character arc for a character. Yeah,
I thought so too, and I would agree with you that scene is good because it turns it on its head, where he's like, you're not, they're implying you're not helping me because of the way I look,
which he's not,
the color of my skin, which he is not. But then he does turn that around and go like, shouldn't you know? Don't you know anything about your people? And he has that guilt about himself. And I was like, well, that was a pretty interesting turn.
But anyway, back on set of Legend the movie, things are going well, except that Ramos forgot to load one of the 12 cameras they're using to take stills to stitch the movie together, blah, 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 blah. And they do one thing that I thought was very funny, because they shoot the movie, it's like him driving the car across the cameras, and they realize they didn't load one camera, and they do a Breaking Bad shot where it's the camera's inside, like looking out at the characters from inside the loading room so it's like a very Breaking Bad inside of something shot out of the characters' faces in a fisheye. I was like, why is this here?
The point though is this is it's weird. I thought this was going to be their whole storyline, but they don't really like. This isn't that important. It's like
this is the end.
It's more that Ramos sort of is like he feels really bad and he's feels
distracted.
Like he's distracted. So he leaves in the middle of the night and just leaves them a note saying just that he feels like he can't be much help if he's so distracted. He has to kind of go on this quest. And then they're like, to their benefit, these characters are like, oh, we should go and help him.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Once Ramos resigns to go follow up and like repatriate this dead man, they're all like, oh, let's go help our friend, and they just walk off and the movie's over.
Yeah. Now, it's an interesting way to set up this episode because it has felt so far like everything had to be through Pratt/Legends kind of he had to be leading the action, and this one he isn't. And it felt like to me that it would have even been a better episode if they had just left them at this point. Like, just leave Bartok and Legend and let this other character go do his thing. I think it's an unfair comment on a show from this time period because I think the selling point is Richard Dean Anderson, but I think it would have been a more interesting show. Or another thought I even had was, how much more fun would it have been if we found out these are the sort of adventures, and I use that term adventures, that Ramos has been doing constantly, like at night, while these other two are just having their stupid bumbling sort of adventures. He's actually having real important things happening, and he's been doing this the whole time. And I had that thought while watching the episode, but I'm like, I think that's maybe insulting your own TV show if you do that.
Well, it's an interesting idea, and I can see you could definitely have worked. I think you're right, though. I think it's too early in the show's run to like have a breakout standalone episode for Ramos. So yeah, obviously they have to bring the main characters along, but it did give Ramos a lot to do. Like, essentially what happens is he goes off and starts investigating. He gets a job at the house of a local landowner who employs a lot of migrant workers, and discovers that this man has like all these Aztec artifacts he's been gathering there. And sort of as Pratt and Bartok enter the episode, they also retrieve the ring, and you get to learn more about this Seamus Calhoun, this like landowner who's also obviously racist as well, and like how he's been collecting these artifacts from Mexico, getting them up here. He sort of explains it in a roundabout way. It's basically the white man's burden theory. It's like he needs to rescue them from the locals because the locals don't appreciate what history they have.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they even make a point, like a legal point later in the episode, that it's not theft for him to take these artifacts from Mexico and bring them into the United States, but it would be a theft to bring them from the United States back to Mexico.
To take them, yeah, they're now his property.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And of course, Ramos has gone undercover, as I mentioned, in the household as staff, because he employs a lot of migrant workers to sort of investigate. And in the kitchen, he meets a Mexican woman who works there, and she doesn't really trust the new guy who has a lot of questions. And obviously, it's not a great place to work. And there's a really good scene midway through the episode where Ramos is really pressing her to like tell her what she knows, and like why are you helping these scumbags? And she like gives this speech about like, Ramos comes from privilege, and he's like has all this idolization, but she's like, I come from extreme poverty, and like she faces racism. We literally see a scene where it's implied she's sexually assaulted regularly at her job, and like she's just like, this is what she has to do daily, so she can't put herself out there like Ramos, who can like have all these like high ideals. And it was actually a great scene where I was just like, oh yeah, this is a very interesting sequence for these two characters to have.
That was the point that made me think, oh, this is so close to becoming a much better show. And again, a type of show I don't think they're wanting to make, but this interaction between these two characters, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty subtle and pretty interesting, because you're on Ramos's side, and then you see another perspective that you hadn't had thought about. And I thought that it was really good, and I think it's the stronger part of the episode. The weaker part of the episode is kind of the more typical adventure sort of stuff that they go on. But this was a well-written scene. I want to mention one thing, though. I don't know if it happens here or it's around here in the episode, where Legend goes to go talk to this Calhoun, and he sort of goes and they're talking, and he's sort of like putting on airs that he's also really interested in these artifacts and blah, blah, blah. But then he sort of does this thing, and explain to me how this would help them in their investigation at all. He's talking to Calhoun, and he's like, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, maybe you need some help with the ring and all this stuff. He's like, it's interesting. He's like, it seems like maybe this guy worked for you, huh? And it's like he does this thing like winking, knowing to like let him know that he's like onto him, and he leaves at that point. And I thought, how is that helping Ramos at all? You've already kind of figured out the connection. Just leave. Why would you be like, I figured out, and then like twiddle your mustache and walk off? What was his game there, other than being a smarty pants?
I can't tell you either. It was I'm just like, all right, tip all your cards on the table, Pratt, before you have any information. Good work.
It was literally like they literally had no suspicions till he did that, and then he leaves, and Calhoun's like, oh, I think this guy is onto something. Let's change tactics. I'm like, Legend, you suck.
I mean, that's the case. I mean, it's around this point that Ramos is fired from the kitchen because he's obviously doesn't belong there and like is a bit of is clearly like working against the household. And he reteams up with Pratt and Bartok, and they were able to get Calhoun to because Calhoun does know these artifacts. He does have a sense of the origin place of the ring, so they're able to go on a journey on the Legend balloon to San Luis Potesti. I'm gonna such a bad pronunciation. San Luis Potesti, Mexico, where a local padre sent the dead man on a mission to recover the artifact. So they kind of discover like where the man came from and why he was up there.
Yeah.
And Ramos meets his mother, who's bereaved to find out her son is dead, and promises to avenge him. And as they go to leave the town and travel back to the United States to find a way to like get Calhoun to implicate himself in the murder, Calhoun has sent down a bunch of goons to ambush them and kill them, essentially.
Yeah, they get pinned down, and then they pull out. What did he call it? The fulminator? Is that what he calls his laser thing?
His laser thing? Is that what they called it?
I think they called it the fulminator. I wrote down fulminator, but maybe it's just me mishearing things. But they of course they're like, oh, we forgot to charge the thing, so they don't have any weapons when they're kind of pinned down. And Ramos jumps to the balloon, and then it has like a laser on it, so he lasers the guy. Then Bartok and Legend can throw smoke things as a distraction, and they get away. And I was like, what an action piece.
I mean, pretty typical action sequence for Legend, but the idea being that Ramos saves them anyway. He's the most competent of the three.
Yeah. Anyway,
they discuss how they're going to pin the crime on Calhoun so they can like get some justice, and Ramos can't wait for them to figure out a solution. So he sneaks off at night to go talk to the woman who works in Calhoun's kitchen, and like is able to like get her to tell him that she overheard the whole thing. She overheard them like plotting his murder, so she actually has everything they need to incriminate him. I guess just her testimony is all they need. But of course, he's immediately caught. Ramos is immediately caught by one of his goons, and the woman has to ride over to Pratt and Bartok and be like, "They're gonna kill Ramos. He's on a wagon somewhere. Go save him."
You mentioned before that it's sort of par for the course for the show, but doesn't it feel like every single episode of the show ends with them jumping in? They're like either jumping in the balloon and chasing someone on like a stagecoach or carriage, or in their little steampunk sort of vehicle. I'm like, I feel like this is the ending of at least 3 episodes.
I think it is. They have some specifics they need in every episode. They need an action sequence, like a fight sequence with guns, and then they need like a chase sequence. And so this is their time for a chase. I think they drive their like a steam powered car out, and then they do play chicken with the man in the wagon, and it's a whole thing. They like jump up, and Ramos fights the guy, and then it's going to go off a cliff, so Pratt has to jump on and stop the wagon. He has to jump on. I don't know. Whatever. It's fine. He saves Ramos. We all know how it's going to end.
Yeah, I know why they have to do it, but it was a bummer that they had to have Legend sort of save Ramos, because, like, again, it would have been cool just to give the guy an episode, and it felt like they had already done more character development on this one episode with him than they had on the 11 previous. So it's like, just give him the episode. We don't need him to Legend to come save the day, but I guess we do.
It did feel more like Legend and Pratt Pratt and Bartok had to be wedged in than they had any real reason to be there for sure. Anyway, they save Ramos, and then you hard cut, and they're just like, I guess Calhoun was arrested. I'm like, sorry, what? And they're like, well, we're gonna go return the artifacts to Mexico. That's what Ramos and the woman are gonna do. And I'm just like,
yeah,
okay. Like they save Ramos, and they just skip everything, and they're just like at the end. I'm like, what? I guess sure that you solved the day, you saved the day.
To be fair, it's like, that's not the most interesting part. They're like, the part was that they figured out he solved the thing. So it's like, well, okay, who cares? All the bad guys are punished. Move on.
I guess so, yeah. It's just very funny. There's like such they barely established like how that would work. They're like, this woman saw something, and they're cut to, it's like, that's all it took. I'm like, okay. And obviously, this is the last episode of the series. I assume they're shooting it somewhat knowing that they're probably getting close to the end of at least the season, maybe. But it ends as they're watching them drive away. They have the weirdest ending to this episode, which is that like Ramos is like leaving. He's just like, you know what, Pratt? I have something to tell you. You're getting slightly better at being a writer. And he's like, thank you. I feel like I am also getting slightly better at being a writer. And they're like, isn't that nice? You're a slightly better, not a great writer, but a slightly better writer. And then they wave goodbye. And I was just like, what? I mean, it's like they watch their own. They're like, this episode is slightly better than some of our previous ones.
It's funny you mentioned that. I didn't pick up on that myself, but it was a weird way to end. My assumption was, and I have looked into that. I didn't see if they had knew they were going to get canceled or not. I think there was probably rumblings along the way that they probably knew, you know, they were on shaky ground just because of the network they were on. So I have a feeling they filmed this sort of knowing like either this is kind of a mid-season finale or a season finale or a series finale. Let's just do a little thing. And we, you know, because if you keep doing episodes, there's nothing concrete about this.
No, for sure. And I mean, I'm not saying they for sure knew they were being canceled, but it was just such a funny way to end it where it's just like, they're saying goodbye. The joke is that he's become slightly better of a writer, and that's good. And it happened to be the last episode. And for me, I'm just like, yeah, this is slightly better written than the previous episode.
Yeah.
What a weird way to end this episode.
And I'll say, for me, bonus points, didn't shoehorn it in a historical figure. I just never really liked that. It's actually maybe my least favorite thing of the show, and I know I like the show more than you did. But yeah, it was a slightly better episode.
Well, why don't we rate it then, George? What did you want to give Skeletons in the Closet?
I'm going to give it a 6.5. I wanted to give it more, but I just kept, while I was watching, I just kept thinking of how much better this episode could have been. Again, you could have done like a fun thing where it wasn't even a straight mystery and it's just an episode of Ramos and it's in between clips of other episodes. Like you see part of episode 2 and Bartok and Legend go to sleep, and then you see Ramos is actually out there doing all this stuff. I think there's a really fun retconning of canon to show that he was like a real hero the whole time that's propping up Legend. I think there was something really fun there, and maybe that's not the show they want to make, but I kept like thinking that while watching this. I was like, oh, that'd be so much better than this. So I could only give it a 6.5.
Well, as I said, I feel like this was better written than what I've seen previously, so I'm going to go all the way up to a 3 for this episode.
I love how much you hate this show.
I
think it's
a
like
bad episode still. It's just slightly better than it has previously been.
I feel like it's so not mean-spirited, this show. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it seems weird to give a show credit for not being like snarky, but I think it's like, here, this is what we are. We're kind of this show, and I hope you like it. And it's like, hey, you're not that good, but it's not like they're not mean, or they're not gross, or they're not.
We'll say this: they're not mean, and they're mostly not gross, except when they're dealing with historical things they don't want to deal with.
That's true. A very good point is, I think to my earlier point, I said it's a hard thing to want to shoehorn in historical figures and then not have a comment on history as a whole. It's like it's hard to keep everything in a cartoon world, you know? And I think they were trying to balance that for a long time, and it's like it's hard to do that. We even had that episode where the indigenous people, they sort of made like a false flag attack, and that was something to be like, oh, anyways, we're not going to talk about this, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, sure, I guess.
I mean, in their episode about Reconstruction of the South, we definitely got an email where people were like, that was a pretty tone-deaf episode.
Yeah. Well, and that's a very good way of saying it. The show's like a little tone-deaf, but I feel like almost like purposely so. Like I think they're trying to make, you said before, it's not so much a kid show. It's just like, this is a family show. You're like, hey, some bad things happen. Like, yeah. We're not going to talk about those. Isn't Richard Dean Anderson fun? You're like, oh, there was a lot of like really scary stuff. Like, yeah. Anyways, he has a mustache.
Yeah. That is, I feel like what they're trying to do. But I'm also just like, then you shouldn't have brought that other stuff up, man. You did that, not me.
Exactly right. Don't write that episode about the South if you don't want to have that conversation. Then you're the one who put it in this time period, so you know, find other ways around it if you want.
Anyway, yeah. You want to hear the final series rating for old Legend now that we're done?
Yeah, it's got to be like 3 something probably. Except my scores are probably pulling it up.
Well, you and Chris.
Yeah, that's right. He gave it like 12s.
The final series average for Legend is 4.19.
Yeah, what do you think? If like someone said, "Hey, what would you give the show out of 10?" Would you say 4? But you'd say way lower than the 4.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty generous.
I honestly, if someone was like, "What it's like," I'd say, solid 5. It's a solid 5 show. You know. Again, I think not much praise here on to give it, but it's just like it's so harmless. It feels hard. It just feels mean to punch on it. You know.
You view it as a small child. It's not its fault.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's okay. It's just Legend. He's not trying to teach you anything.
He's not trying to teach you anything. He barely knows anything himself.
Yeah, he doesn't even really know history. He just thought it'd be funny to have a mustache. Just leave it alone.
You imagine this as Richard Dean Anderson's a 12-year-old sitting on a play in his mother's front room.
It's like, I'll say this really quickly. A couple of years ago, some neighbors invited us over for dinner, and dinner was lovely, and they're very lovely. But then after dinner, they were like, okay, and now some entertainment. And I was like, haha, what? And their younger daughter did like a puppet show play for us that went on for what I think was about 16 hours. And I remember thinking, like, how long can you pretend to really enjoy this for? Anyways, but you can't like make fun of it because it's the child doing a puppet show. So I can't be like, these characters aren't developed at all. You know, you just go, oh, okay, sure.
You just get up and you're like, that's about a 6. I'd give that a 6.
Yeah. I was like, this is a solid 6. So pretty good. You're not hurting. You're not trying to teach me anything.
Oh dear. All right, well, that's the end of our run of Legend. You can email us continuumdrag@gmail.com, of course, if you ever want to get a hold of us. And, of course, you can follow us on social media and all the usual places. And that wraps it up. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Thanks for joining us, listener. See you on the next episode. Bye, Jordan.
Bye.
Can't get enough Continuum Drag? Commission a bonus episode for charity.
Want us to watch an episode we missed after using the escape pod or during a best of run? No problem.
Is there an episode of a series we've never watched or a TV movie you want us to cover? You got it.
Wish we'd comment on your favorite movie, content, or other weird media? Sure, why not?
All you have to do is make a donation to one of the charities selected by past guests on our website.
We suggest a donation of $50 per television hour of content we're watching, but everyone's means are different, so give what you can.
Get all the details about bonus episodes for charity on our website, continuumdrag.podbean.com, or follow the links in our social media profiles.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Ontario, Canada, and Seoul, South Korea. Theme music by James Rick Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.